It's not what you know, it's who you know. So in business, we have these pithy little sayings. Well, in all of life, really, we have these pithy little sayings. They're kind of either common sense or kind of like essentially modern day proverbs, basically. So this one about success, being not being about what you know. In other words, your skills and abilities and your education, perhaps. It's about who you know. I think there is. It's not always true. I don't believe. I believe that sometimes what you know really matters, and I think it's even fair to say that sometimes what you know influences who you know. So, for instance, if I know a lot about marketing, and I'm able to, if I know a lot about marketing, which leads me to get good results for my clients, which gets me referrals to other clients. Pretty soon, I may know a lot of the right people, even though I didn't at first because of what I know. Okay, so what you know, I think, is still very important. And if it wasn't, then I guess there would be no need to learn anything. But um, it does make you wonder, though, sometimes when you look at politicians or even sometimes people in business, and you're like, this person doesn't really seem to know a whole lot, maybe, or they don't seem to be particularly intelligent, but somehow they're in this position that they're in. And it kind of makes you step back a minute and be like, huh, maybe this who you know thing really does matter. I think when it comes to one of the things that I've thought about some, is the pay inequities, or the difference in what people make. And some of it comes down to what you know. But the who you know thing is actually really important too. It seems like it's like how much you get paid is not a direct function of effort. It really is not. Like it's correlated. There's correlation, but it's not. It's so far from the only factor. Like I used to work probably depending on how all you calculate working hard, but if you in terms of emotional toll, physical effort, and maybe hours spent, I probably worked about 5 times as hard per dollar as what I do now, something like that. And it's true that I've gained a lot of knowledge and experience since then. But I think it's also true that if you'd taken me back at that time, so let's say my 21-year-old self, okay? If if I was able to go back to the past, I could teach my 21-year-old self a lot of what I know now in probably a year. Probably under in a year I could teach most of what I know. Um, and because a lot of my core natural aptitudes and abilities like those already were there back then, right? They just weren't developed in the marketing sense of it, perhaps. So, in terms of techniques, tactics, even mindsets and attitudes, opinions, probably I could teach my 20-year-old self everything he would need to know in a year, something like that, for like what I know currently. And then the question is, well, could that 20-year-old self, with that armed with that knowledge and those skills, could that 20-year-old self have made what I'm making now? Now, granted, inflation has, there's a real difference there in terms of inflation. But even in with inflation, there's still not even any kind of pay parity there. And it so I think that I guess the answer is maybe, right? Like maybe I could have, but so much of well, actually, it's really hard. I think, at least in my case, it's kind of difficult to make a clear distinction between for the opportunities that I have been able to tap into how much of that has come from my expertise and my work ethic, and how much has come from blessing of the Lord. And and in the blessing of the Lord category, basically, I think a lot of that would come. You could also put in the who you know category. So, because I could, here again, as with many jobs and many things, there's a huge disparity between the bottom of the pile in terms of how much they get paid and the top of the pile, how much they get paid. So, how much a little marketing grunt gets paid doing some like posting social media for some company versus how much the chief marketing officer makes for that company, we're often talking a huge disparity. And so the what you get paid is not necessarily based exactly on output. Now, in a sense, yes, the CMO is able to produce higher output, right? Because they're managing a team, they're setting strategic direction. But it's still just so interesting to me that you could take me at 20 and be him that 20-year-old be taught the skills I have now, and you can take me at very nearly 40 and the relationships I have now, and I don't know how much the 20-year-old could have made with the marketing skills that I have now because I didn't have that at that time. But I suspect still the difference based on relationships and credibility from time and that kind of thing, probably without the current relationships that I have, I would be making like a half to a third of what I'm making currently, potentially. And that's easily very possible because business to business type projects can be very dependent on who you know. And then, however, if I knew other people who were at a different level than the people that I know now, it's very possible that I could quite easily double, triple, or 10x my revenue from what it is currently. You see? So while I'm way above where I could be, had I just gained this marketing knowledge, just started positioning myself as a marketing guy, just started trying to knock on doors and get things done. At the same time, I'm sure that depending on the clients I had, the type of contracts I had, various things like that, I'm sure probably if I knew more of the right people or different right people, like more right people, if you will, like people higher up or people who like me more or whatever the case was, that probably I could double, triple, or 10x my revenue without any additional skill, just because I had proximity. So I guess, if we're going to nicely alliterate this, we could say on the one hand you have proficiency and you have proximity. So proficiency absolutely matters. It affects proximity, but proximity probably has more upside than what proficiency does. So in other words, take a given field like marketing. Now, there's always more you could learn in the field of marketing. There's a lot of marketing as a broad term encompasses a lot of disciplines. So there's always more you can learn inside those things, right? But sometimes the real key is to actually simplify. That's one of the core values of StoryPro is simplicity. And so you can make the argument that there, at some point, you could kind of tap out on, not that there's not always new things to learn, but as far as like, you can make the argument that at some point, aside from stuff you need to keep learning to keep up with the industry, right? The changes in platforms, the changes in technology. But as far as the basic principles you could argue can be learned relatively quickly and maybe don't change a whole lot, right? So it's kind of like if you become a doctor or a nurse, you can learn all the basics that you need. Then you need some continuing education, but you know, you can remain on that basic training you got, does most of what you need for the next 40 years of your career, basically, right? So, in the same way, for my marketing career, on the proficiency side, in theory, I could get someone proficient in a year. And then, given that they had the right aptitudes and then, came as the right person, I could, in theory, get proficient in 1 year. And then from there, the real upside is proximity. So it's who you know, right? So proficiency is like kind of a foundation, if you will. It's a starting point. It's kind of like getting a degree to where you can check that box on your resume or your application and be like, yeah, I got my degree. So you don't have to like sort me out of the pile just based on the fact that I don't have a degree. And then, which by the way I do not, in case you're curious, but and then the next thing is proximity. So it actually, as I'm thinking about this, it really, in a way, for someone who's more on the introverted side and who would like to think of the world, or who kind of would like to believe that my proficiencies should earn me opportunities, I think the way the real world works is that like 20% of your opportunity comes from your proficiency, and about 80% of your opportunity comes from your proximity. So for me, you're being thoughtful about my proximity and leaning into that is probably got a lot more upside for me at this point than what proficiency does. So if you're starting out in your career, keep in mind you want excellent proficiency. I'm 100% a fan of high proficiency, but proximity is probably what's going to get you those opportunities that really are life transformative.